The Zetherian warship emerged from hyperspace like a predator spotting wounded prey, its massive hull bristling with weapons that could crack a moon in half. And aboard the bridge, Supreme Commander Lord Vexler watched his tactical display with satisfaction as the small human vessel tried desperately to escape. The chase lasted barely 10 minutes before the primitive craft's engines sputtered and died. Whether from damage or simple mechanical failure, the Zithians neither knew nor cared. And soon the small ship sat helpless in the vacuum while boarding craft swarmed around it like insects on a corpse inside the human vessel. They found only one occupant, an elderly male who sat calmly in the pilot's chair as armored Zithrian warriors burst through the airlock with weapons raised and ready to fire. But the old human simply raised his weathered hands in a gesture of surrender that needed no translation. Captain James Harrigan was 73 standard Earth years old, his hair more silver than its original brown, and his face lined with decades of experience under Earth's sun. And as the Zithrian soldiers hauled him to his feet, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints complained but whose spirit remained unbroken. The aliens around him stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scaled skin that ranged from deep emerald to burnished copper. Their eyes were yellow and slitted like ancient reptiles, and their mouths held rows of teeth designed by evolution for tearing meat. And yet Harrigan met their gaze without flinching. They brought him aboard the flagship in electromagnetic restraints that hummed with enough power to stop a charging Earth bull. But on Harrigan's thin wrists, they seemed almost comically excessive, like using a cannon to hunt rabbits. The Zetherian Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 3,000 years by their counting. They had conquered 472 different species and absorbed them into their vast federation through force of arms and overwhelming military superiority. And in all those centuries of expansion, they had never encountered meaningful resistance that lasted more than a few planetary rotations. Lord Vexler sat on his command throne examining the human with an expression mixing curiosity and contempt. Around him, the bridge crew worked at their stations while tactical displays showed the positions of Zetherian fleets scattered across a dozen star systems. So this is what humanity sends to meet us, Vexler said in his own language, though his translator caller rendered the words into English that crackled from speakers mounted on Harrigan's restraints. An old male barely capable of standing, pathetic Harrigan remained silent and motionless, his pale blue eyes taking in every detail of the bridge with the trained observation of someone who had spent a lifetime evaluating tactical situations. Supreme Commander rose from his throne and descended the steps toward his prisoner, each footfall echoing in the sudden quiet as the bridge crew paused their work to watch the confrontation. Your species discovered faster than light travel only 43 cycles ago, Vexler continued, circling Harrigan like a predator examining its kill. You occupy exactly 1 star system with 9 planets and a handful of primitive stations. Your technology is barely sufficient to reach your own moon with reliability. One of the other bridge officers laughed, a hissing sound like steam escaping from cracked pipes, and soon others joined in until the chamber filled with the sound of Zetherian amusement. And yet you dare to refuse our generous offer of integration into the Empire, Vexler said, his voice rising. You dare to reject the protection and guidance we extend to all lesser species. Harrigan finally spoke, his voice rough from years and dry from hours. Without water but steady as bedrock, we politely declined your offer of subjugation. The laughter stopped instantly, and Vexler's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits as he processed the human's words, subjugation. The Supreme Commander repeated slowly, testing the word. You misunderstand the nature of our offer, primitive. We bring order to chaos and civilization to savagery. We have lifted hundreds of species from their muddy planets and given them purpose in the greater galactic community as servants and slaves. Harrigan replied calmly. We've read your treaties and examined the fate of your previous conquests. No, thank you. Vexler's hand moved faster than human eyes could track, striking Harrigan across the face with enough force to snap his head sideways and split his lip. Blood ran down the old man's chin, but he straightened slowly and met the alien commander's gaze again. Without a trace of fear, you will learn respect, Vexler hissed. Or you will learn pain. Behind him, the throne room's massive view screen activated, showing Earth hanging in space, like a blue-green jewel against the black. Clouds swirled across its surface, and its single large moon hung nearby in eternal orbit your home world, Vexter said, gesturing at the display, so fragile and so alone in the darkness. It would take my fleet exactly 7 hours to reduce every city to ash and boil your oceans into steam. Harrigan said nothing, but his jaw tightened slightly as he stared at the image of Earth. I am giving you one final opportunity to serve your species, the Supreme Commander continued. Return to your world and tell your leaders that the Zitherian Empire demands immediate and unconditional surrender. You have 1 solar cycle to comply, and if we refuse, Harrigan asked quietly, then we will demonstrate to the galaxy what happens to primitives who reject the Empire's mercy. Vexer replied, we will erase your civilization so completely that in 100 years, no one will remember Earth ever existed. Your species will become a cautionary tale told to keep other worlds obedient. The Supreme Commander returned to his throne and made a dismissive gesture. Immediately, guards grabbed Harrigan's arms and began dragging him toward the detention levels. As the door closed behind them, Vexer addressed his senior staff, prepare the invasion fleet and ready the planet breakers. In 26 hours we will add another conquest to the Empire's glory. The officers saluted and began issuing orders while tactical displays lit up with fleet movements and target coordinates down in the detention block. Harrigan was thrown into a cell barely large enough for his frame. The energy barrier snapped into place with a sound like breaking glass, and he was alone with his thoughts and the taste of blood in his mouth. He touched his split lip carefully and then moved to the small bench that served as the cell's only furniture. Lowering himself down with a grunt as his knees protested through the barrier, he could see other cells, holding other prisoners from other conquered worlds. Beings of a dozen different species who had made the mistake of resisting Zitherian expansion. A young Zitherian guard stood watch at the end of the corridor, barely into adulthood by his species standards and clearly uncomfortable with detention. Duty Harrigan leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. In his mind, he was already counting down the hours until the deadline expired and everything changed forever. The hours passed slowly in the detention cell as Harrigan sat motionless on the hard bench. His eyes closed, but his mind racing through calculations and contingencies. Around him, the ship hummed with the sounds of a massive warship preparing for battle. The young Zitherian guard, whose name was Sikthar, paced the corridor between the cells with visible nervousness. He had been assigned to detention duty only 3 cycles ago and still felt uncomfortable. Being surrounded by prisoners from conquered worlds and like the hardened veterans who ran the ship's combat divisions, Sikthar had grown up during peacetime, and his only experience with war came from training simulations and propaganda broadcasts. The reality of imprisoned beings and impending planetary destruction sat uneasily in his chest. He found himself watching the human prisoner more than the others. There was something about the old male's calm demeanor that seemed wrong somehow, like a prey animal that didn't run when predators approached after nearly 6 hours of silence. Sikthar's curiosity overcame his training, and he approached Harrigan's cell slowly. "Why did they send you?" the young guard asked in heavily accented English, his translator caller doing most of the work. "You are old and weak by your species standards. Why not send a warrior or diplomat?" Harrigan opened his eyes slowly and regarded the guard with an expression that might have been amusement. Blood had dried on his chin, and a bruise was forming along his jaw, but he seemed unconcerned I'd volunteered. Harrigan replied simply, "But why?" Sikthar pressed. Genuinely confused, "You must know this mission would likely end in capture or death. Why would an elder volunteer for such danger?" The old man shifted on the bench, settling into a more comfortable position before answering. "Because I'm old enough to remember things your commanders have forgotten or never learned." Sikthar's head tilted in the Zitherian expression of curiosity. "What things war?" Harrigan said softly. "Real war? Not the one-sided massacres your empire calls conquest." The guard's scales rippled with uncertainty, but he didn't walk away. Instead, he glanced down the corridor to ensure no senior officers were watching, and then moved closer to the cell barrier. "The Empire has fought thousands of wars," Sikthar said with less confidence than he intended. We have never been defeated in battle because you've never fought a war, Harrigan replied. You've conducted invasions against species that couldn't match your technology. That's not war. That's extermination, the young Zithrian bristled at this. Many species fought back with courage and determination. The Krell resistance lasted almost 3 full cycles before 3 months, Harrigan interrupted. That's not a war, that's a tantrum. Humanity has fought wars that lasted years, decades. Entire generations born and dying without knowing peace. Sikthar fell silent. His training told him to ignore the prisoner's words as propaganda, but something in the human's voice carried weight beyond simple boasting. I was born in 2152, Harrigan continued, his eyes focusing on something far beyond the cell walls. By then, humanity had already nearly destroyed itself several times over. I grew up hearing stories from my grandfather about the world wars that killed hundreds of millions. About weapons so terrible we created them specifically to never use them, because their use would end civilization. The guard shifted uncomfortably, but remained listening. My species spent thousands of years fighting itself. The old man said we divided ourselves by skin color, religion, resources, ideology, territory, and things so petty I'm embarrassed to mention them. We invented ways to kill each other that your empire's weapons designers would find excessive, then your species is savage and self-destructive, Sikthar replied. The empire will bring you order, and you're not listening. Harrigan cut him off sharply. We didn't destroy ourselves. That's the point. We came so close so many times, but we always pulled back at the last second. We learned to control the monster inside us, but we never forgot how to unleash it, the young guard wanted to argue, but found himself speechless. I volunteered for this mission. Because I'm 73 years old? Harrigan continued. I've seen things that would give your commanders nightmares. I watched footage of nuclear weapons turning cities into shadows on the ground. I studied battles where millions died in single days. I learned about chemical weapons that melted soldiers inside their own skin and biological agents that turned human bodies into virus factories. Sikthar's scales had gone pale. His species had weapons of mass destruction too, but they rarely needed them. Against technologically inferior opponents, your empire conquers species that fear death, Harrigan said quietly. But humanity spent centuries learning how to die while taking our enemies with us. We invented suicide attacks, scorched earth tactics, mutually assured destruction. We studied every possible way to make victory so costly that even winning becomes losing. This is just talk, Sikthar said weakly. Desperate words from a captured enemy. The old man smiled without humor. Is it? Then tell me why your sensors showed my scout ship traveling alone with no escort or support. Because humanity's fleet is primitive and small, the guard replied automatically. Or because we wanted you to capture me, Harrigan said, and suddenly the temperature in the corridor seemed to drop. Did your commanders ever wonder why Earth sent a single old man in a slow ship right into your patrol routes? Sikthar's eyes widened as the implications sank in. We've been watching your empire for 40 years. Harrigan continued, ever since we developed FTL, we've been studying you from the shadows. Learning your tactics, mapping your territories, identifying your weaknesses, and most importantly, we've been talking to the species you've conquered. The young guard took an involuntary step backward. Every species you've absorbed into your empire has its own history of resistance, the old man said. The Krell remember their 3-month war. The Ventari remember their siege, the Hrask remember their final stand, and all of them remember that the Zithrian Empire crushed them through overwhelming force, because we are superior, Thor whispered. But his conviction was crumbling. No, Harrigan replied firmly. Because they fought the way you expected them to fight. In formation, with honor, according to the rules of civilized warfare. Humanity gave up on civilized warfare around the time we invented gunpowder. The corridor fell silent, except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. I was chosen for this mission because I remember what we're capable of, Harrigan said, his voice carrying the weight of history. I remember the firebombing of Dresden, the siege of Leningrad, the island-hopping campaigns in the Pacific where every meter of ground cost lives. I remember reading about the Mongol invasions, the 30 Years' War. The Vietnam conflict. Sikthar didn't recognize any of those names, but the way Harrigan spoke them, made his blood run cold. Your Lord Vexthar made a mistake, the old man concluded. He gave us an ultimatum thinking we would beg for mercy. But humanity doesn't beg. We negotiate from strength, or we go down fighting. And if we're going down, we make absolutely certain to take our enemies with us. The young guard's hands were shaking now. He looked at the calm, elderly human sitting in the cell and suddenly saw something far more dangerous than a fragile primitive. I should report this conversation, Sikthar said. But he didn't move. You should, Harrigan agreed. Tell your commanders exactly what I said. Tell them that in less than 20 hours, they're going to learn the difference between conquest and war. The guard turned and walked quickly toward the security station. His mind reeling with everything he'd heard, he filed his report through the proper channels. Highlighting the prisoner's claims and veiled threats, the report reached Lord Vexthar's staff within the hour, and was promptly dismissed as the desperate psychological tactics of a doomed species. The Supreme Commander himself read it and laughed before ordering preparations to continue, but Sikthar couldn't shake the memory of Harrigan's pale blue eyes and the absolute certainty in his voice. When he spoke about humanity's capacity for war, the deadline expired at precisely 0800 hours. Galactic Standard Time, and the silence from Earth was deafening. No surrender transmission, no desperate pleas for mercy, no last-minute negotiations. Just silence that seemed to mock the Zetherian Empire's ultimatum. Lord Vexthar sat on his command throne surrounded by holographic displays, showing fleet positions and targeting solutions for every major population center on Earth. His senior staff stood at attention, waiting for the order to begin the bombardment that would erase humanity from existence. Bring the prisoner to the bridge, the Supreme Commander ordered. I want him to watch his world die and know that his species' defiance accomplished nothing but their own extinction. 10 minutes later, Sikthar and another guard escorted Harrigan through the massive doors into the command center. The old man's hands were still bound, but he walked with steady dignity, despite the bruises that had darkened on his face overnight. The bridge crew turned to watch as the human was brought before Lord Vexthar's throne. Many of them had never seen a live human before, and they studied him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Your leaders have chosen death, Vexthar announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. In moments, my fleet will reduce your cities to rubble and your civilization to dust. Do you have any final words before your species ends? Harrigan stood silent for a long moment, his eyes moving across the tactical displays and fleet positions with the practiced observation of a career military officer. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and clear. You want war, the old man said, and every eye on the bridge focused on him. Then we will give you war, Vexthar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Your planet has no fleet capable of challenging even one of my destroyers. You have no weapons that can penetrate our shields. You have nothing but primitive rockets and desperate courage. You're right, Harrigan agreed, and confusion rippled through the bridge crew. We can't match your fleet in open combat. We can't challenge your technology directly. We can't win a conventional war. Then you admit defeat. The Supreme Commander said triumphantly. No, Harrigan replied, and his pale blue eyes hardened like ice forming over deep water. I said we can't win a conventional war, but humanity stopped fighting conventional wars centuries ago. The smile faded from Vexthar's face. You prepared for fleets and armies, the old man continued. You expected us to meet you in open space with honor and courage. You thought we would fight by your rules and die according to your schedule? Harrigan took a step forward, and the guards tensed, but didn't intervene. But we've read Sun Tzu, who taught that all warfare is based on deception. We've studied Clausewitz, who explained that war is politics by other means. We've learned from every guerrilla fighter and resistance movement in human history. Enough of this, Vexthar started to say. But Harrigan's voice cut through. You want war, the human repeated. Louder now. We will give you human war, not the sanitized conquests you're used to. Not honorable fleets meeting in designated battle zones. Not civilized rules of engagement. The tactical officer at his station suddenly stiffened and began frantically typing commands into his console. Supreme Commander, he called out, I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures emerging throughout the system. Vexthor's head snapped toward the display. The Earth fleet. Destroy them immediately, negative, sir, the officer replied. Confusion in his voice. These aren't warships. They're registering as civilian transports and cargo vessels. Hundreds of them on the main view screen, dozens of human ships appeared from hyperspace. They were ungainly things compared to sleek Zetherian warships. More like flying warehouses than military vessels, they're broadcasting surrender codes, another officer reported, claiming they carried diplomatic envoys and representatives from Earth's government seeking to negotiate terms. Vexthor's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Scan them for weapons. Scans show minimal defensive systems only, the sensor officer confirmed. No significant armaments detected. The Supreme Commander turned back to Harrigan. Your people send surrender ships after the deadline expires. This changes nothing. Those aren't surrender ships, Harrigan said quietly. And something in his tone made every Zetherian on the bridge feel suddenly cold. Alarms began shrieking across the bridge as sensor stations lit up with warning, sir. The civilian ships are launching thousands of small craft, the tactical officer shouted. They're spreading throughout the system. Some are heading toward our fleet positions. Others are making runs toward our occupied worlds. Destroy them, Vexthor ordered. We're trying, sir, but there are too many. They're using evasive patterns unlike anything in our tactical databases, and they're jamming our targeting systems with some kind of adaptive interference. On the view screen, the situation became clear as human drop pods and stealth shuttles scattered across Zetherian-controlled space like seeds in the wind. They moved with purpose and precision, suggesting careful planning and practice. Those ships you're tracking aren't carrying diplomats, Harrigan said. And now he was smiling. They're deployment platforms. Every one of those pods contains a team of human special forces operators, combat engineers, intelligence specialists, and resistance trainers. Vexthor stared at him in growing horror right now. The old man continued. Several thousand of humanity's best soldiers are landing on every world you control in this sector. They're not there to fight your armies in open battle. They're there to teach every species you've conquered exactly how to fight back. Impossible, the Supreme Commander hissed. Even if they reach the surface, our garrison forces will hunt them down within days. You really don't understand, Harrigan said, shaking his head. These aren't invasion forces. They're insurgents. My species has been perfecting guerrilla warfare for thousands of years. We've fought in jungles, deserts, cities, mountains, and frozen wastelands. We've learned how to turn every terrain into a battlefield. Reports began flooding in from across the fleet. Human teams had already made planetfall on 3 different worlds and 2 orbital stations on Krinsix, your manufacturing world. Harrigan said as if reading from a script he'd memorized. Our teams are currently infiltrating your production facilities. In approximately 48 hours, you'll start experiencing mysterious equipment failures and supply chain disruptions. The manufacturing world's commander appeared on a COM screen. Supreme Commander? We have reports of explosions in the Eastern Industrial Complex. Casualties are minimal, but 3 primary assembly lines are offline. Vexthor's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. On Thardax, Harrigan continued calmly, your Fortress Moon, where you keep your main garrison for this sector. Our people are already inside your perimeter. They won't attack directly. They'll make your soldiers paranoid. They'll sabotage equipment. They'll strike from shadows and disappear. Another COM channel opened, showing a panicked Zetherian officer. We're under attack. Unknown hostiles using stealth technology. 3 sentries dead. Attackers vanished before reinforcements arrived. This is just the beginning, the old man said. My species has studied your empire for 40 years. We know which worlds are critical to your supply lines. We know where your fleets refuel. We know which garrisons are undermanned and which commanders are incompetent. Lord Vexthor rose from his throne. Towering over Harrigan, you sacrifice your own people on a futile gesture. My forces will crush these insects, will they? Harrigan asked. Because we also know something else about your empire. We know that 70% of your military consists of conscripts from conquered species. Beings who hate you but serve because they have no choice. Until now, the old man's voice grew harder. Every human team carries weapons. supplies, and most importantly, information. We're giving your slaves the tools and training to fight back. We're teaching them tactics you've never encountered. We're showing them that the great Cytherian Empire can bleed. Chaos erupted across the bridge as reports came in from a dozen worlds simultaneously. Attacks on supply depots, sabotaged communications arrays, garrison troops reporting contact with unknown enemies who struck and vanished like ghosts. You wanted to make an example of Earth, Harrigan said over the noise. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens to species that refuse the Empire's mercy. Congratulations. Right. Vexther's hand shot out and grabbed Harrigan by the throat, lifting the old man off his feet. I should kill you now. Harrigan's face reddened, but he managed to speak. Go ahead. I'm 73 years old, and I volunteered for a one-way mission. But killing me won't stop what's already in motion. The Supreme Commander threw him to the deck, and Harrigan landed hard. Gasping for air, you've made a fatal mistake, Vexther snarled. You've guaranteed your planet's destruction? The old man climbed slowly to his feet, one hand rubbing his throat. No. You made the fatal mistake. You underestimated us. You thought we were just another primitive species ready to roll over. He met the alien commander's yellow eyes without flinching. Humanity has toppled empires before. We've fought tyranny in 1,000 forms. And we've always been willing to pay any price for freedom. Lord Vexther turned to his weapons officer. Target Earth. Prepare to fire. 6 weeks into the conflict in the Cytherian Empire was discovering that human war was unlike anything in their 3,000-year history of conquest. On 47 different worlds across their territory, the carefully maintained order was collapsing into chaos. Kryn 6, the manufacturing hub that supplied weapons and equipment for an entire sector, the problems started small. A faulty power relay here, a contaminated fuel shipment there, accidents that happened on any industrial world. But within 10 days, production had fallen by 30%, and the Cytherian overseers couldn't explain why. Plant Manager Kreth stood in the smoking ruins of assembly. Line 7, watching firefighting team spray foam on the twisted wreckage of what had been the sector's primary weapons fabrication facility. This was the 4th major incident in his many-week sabotage. His security chief Drax confirmed, pointing to scorch marks on a support beam. Someone placed shape charges at exactly the right structural points to bring down the entire line. How did they penetrate our security? Kreth demanded. We have sensors, guards, checkpoints at every entrance. Drax's scales rippled with frustration. The humans didn't come through checkpoints. We found entry points through maintenance tunnels, air ducts, even the waste recycling system. They move like smoke 3 sectors away in the worker housing district's human sergeant. Chen sat with a group of Krell laborers in the back room of what appeared to be a food distribution center. The Krell were insectoid beings who had been conquered 40 years ago, pressed into service as industrial workers. The key is patience. Chen explained in the Krell language what she'd learned during the 6 months of preparation before deployment. You don't want to shut down production completely. That brings too much attention. Instead, you introduce small failures that cascade. She pulled up a holographic schematic of the facility. A coolant line develops a slow leak here. Temperature rises in Sector 4. Quality control rejects the parts. Production slows to investigate. Meanwhile, you've damaged the backup coolant system, so repairs take 3 times longer than expected. One of the Krell workers named Click 17 gestured uncertainty. The overseers will punish us for the failures. Not if the failures appear random and systemic, Chen replied. Blame old equipment. Blame poor maintenance schedules. Blame budget cuts. The Zitharians have gotten lazy after centuries of easy conquest. They don't question inefficiency anymore. She distributed small devices no larger than a fingernail. These are timer-based corrosion accelerators. Place them on any metal component, and within 2 weeks, the metal will develop stress fractures. By the time it fails, the device has dissolved into undetectable dust. The Krell workers accepted the devices with growing excitement. For the first time in 40 years, they had weapons against their oppressors across the planet. In 17 different locations, similar meetings were taking place as human special forces teams, trained resistance cells in the art of industrial sabotage, economic warfare, and psychological operations on the fortress moon of Thardax. The situation was even worse for the Zitharians. The massive garrison that housed 50,000 troops had become a prison of paranoia where soldiers jumped at shadows and officers. Trusted no one Commander Thexner reviewed the casualty reports with mounting dread. 47 soldiers dead in 6 weeks, hundreds more wounded. And they had yet to capture, or even clearly see, a single human attacker. Explain this, he demanded. Throwing the datapad at his security chief, they strike at night using stealth technology we can't detect. The chief replied warily. They target sentries, patrols, anyone isolated or alone. They kill silently and vanish before reinforcements arrive. We outnumber them thousands to one, Dexner shouted. How can dozens of humans terrorize an entire garrison? The answer came from unexpected quarters when a young Zitharian soldier named Sikthar requested an urgent meeting with the command staff. He had been transferred to Thardax 2 weeks earlier after his tour on Moot. Lord Vexthar's flagship. I spoke with the human prisoner, Sikthar explained. Before the war started, he told me about guerrilla warfare, about how humans fought wars against themselves for centuries. What does this have to do with our situation? Dexner demanded impatiently. He said, humanity learned to make victory costly. The young soldier continued, they don't need to defeat us militarily. They just need to make occupation so painful and expensive that we withdraw. The commander stared at him. We don't withdraw. The Empire has never abandoned a conquered world, then they'll bleed us forever. Sikthar replied quietly. That's what humans do. They learned patience from conflicts that lasted decades. They're willing to lose 1,000 soldiers to kill one of ours, because they know eventually the math works in their favor. Outside the fortress perimeter, human Lieutenant Marcus Johnson led his 8-person team through the lunar landscape using nothing but hand signals and night vision equipment. They had been on Thardax for 5 weeks and had conducted 23 successful operations without losing a single team member. Johnson held up a fist, and his team froze instantly. Through his scope, he could see a Zithian patrol moving along a predictable route they'd followed for 3 nights running. The aliens were nervous, weapons ready, eyes scanning the darkness to alert. Johnson whispered into his com. They're expecting us, his second in command. Corporal Williams nodded. So we go loud negative, Johnson replied. We ghost them. Let them patrol all night, seeing nothing. Paranoia is better than contact. The team melted back into the rocks and moved to their secondary objective, a communications relay that connected the fortress to orbital command. They didn't destroy it. That would be too obvious. Instead, they installed a device that would introduce random errors into transmissions. Orders will arrive garbled, Williams explained as she worked. Reports will contain mistakes. It's nothing catastrophic, but enough to create confusion and slow down response times. It was psychological warfare at its finest, making the enemy doubt their own systems and communications. Meanwhile, in the garrison mess hall, Johnson's counterpart in the infiltration team, Specialist Park, sat eating with Zitharian soldiers who thought she was a Ventari laborer. Her disguise was perfect down to the prosthetic features and scent modifiers. She listened to the soldiers complaining about the mysterious attackers, about the stress of constant alert status, about friends who had died in the dark. I heard they can walk through walls. One soldier said nervously, don't be stupid, another replied, but his voice lacked confidence. They're just using good stealth tech, then why can't our sensors detect them? The first soldier demanded. Why does every patrol that goes out after dark report? Feeling watched, Park said nothing, simply listening and taking mental notes about troop morale and security procedures. Later, she would transmit everything to the other human teams, who would use the intelligence to plan their next operations on Earth. The reality of what humanity had done was finally becoming clear to the watching galaxy. The surrender fleet had been humanity's entire stockpile of transport vessels converted to deployment platforms. 10,000 Special Forces operators scattered across Etherian space. They weren't there to win battles, but to light fires that the Empire couldn't put out. In Geneva, the Human Defense Council monitored reports from every team. Fleet Admiral Rodriguez studied the tactical map showing the locations of human operations across 47 worlds. "The Zetherians still don't understand," she said to her staff. "They keep trying to fight us with conventional tactics. Production on Kryn 6 is down 60%, her intelligence officer reported. Garrison forces on Thardax are requesting reinforcements due to declining morale. Supply convoys are being ambushed on 12 different routes in the resistance movements," Rodriguez asked. "Growing faster than projected," the officer replied with satisfaction. "The Krell have formed 3 major cells on Kryn 6. The Ventari are conducting their own operations on 4 worlds. Even species we didn't make contact with are starting to rebel." Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. "The Zetherians built their empire on fear and overwhelming force. We're showing their subjects that the Empire isn't invincible." Back on Kryn 6, Sergeant Chen watched as Krell workers carried out their first independent operation, targeting a fuel depot with precision that would have made human sappers proud. The explosion lit the night sky, but by the time Zetherian security arrived, the workers were back in their dormitories. Apparently asleep, Click 17 approached Chen afterward, his mandibles clicking, and what she'd learned was Krell laughter. "The overseers will blame poor storage protocols." "Exactly," Chen confirmed. "And while they're investigating, you hit 2 more targets. Always keep them reacting. Never let them get ahead of the chaos." The Krell worker studied her curiously. "Why does your species help us?" "You could have negotiated with the Empire, found some accommodation." Chen's expression hardened. "Because we've been where you are. We've lived under tyrants and oppressors. We know what it's like to fight for freedom against overwhelming odds. And we learned that the only way to defeat empires is to show their subjects that resistance works." She handed Click 17 another package of supplies. "Besides, helping you helps us. Every hour the Empire spends dealing with rebellions is an hour they're not attacking Earth." 6 months after the war began, the Zetherian Empire faced something it never encountered in 3,000 years of expansion. Simultaneous rebellions on 143 conquered worlds. In the center could not hold Supreme Commander Lord Vexter. Stared at the strategic display in his command center, watching red warning indicators blossom across the map like a plague. Each one represented a world where imperial authority had collapsed or was collapsing. "Status report," he demanded. Though he already knew the answers would be grim, his intelligence chief stepped forward with visible reluctance. "Kryn 6 has ceased all military production. The Krell workers have seized control of 17 major facilities and are operating them independently. Our garrison forces pulled back to defensive positions around the capital. Thardax, the Supreme Commander, asked the fortress garrison requested immediate evacuation 3 days ago," another officer reported. "Morale collapsed completely after a coordinated uprising by Ventari support staff. We lost control of the eastern sectors, and the humans are now operating openly with resistance forces." Vexter's claws dug grooves into the tactical display. "How did it come to this?" "We deployed overwhelming military force. We hunted the human teams relentlessly. That was the problem," a new voice said from the entrance. And everyone turned to see Sikthar entering the command center. He had been promoted to strategic analysis after his insights about human warfare proved accurate. The young Zetherian approached the display. "We tried to fight them the way we fight everyone else, with superior firepower and direct confrontation, but the humans never gave us a target to destroy." He manipulated the display, showing human team movements over the past 6 months. "Look at their pattern. They don't hold territory. They don't defend positions. They strike and disappear. They teach and move on. They're not trying to defeat us militarily. Then what are they trying to do? Dexter demanded. They're trying to make occupation impossible, Sikthar replied. Every garrison we reinforce is a garrison we pull from somewhere else. Every supply convoy we protect requires soldiers we need elsewhere. Every world in rebellion ties down forces that could be conquering new territory. He pulled up economic projections. At current rates, the cost of maintaining control over rebelling worlds will exceed our entire military budget within 8 months. And that's assuming the rebellions don't spread further. They will spread, another officer confirmed grimly. Intelligence reports indicate human teams have made contact with resistance movements on 74 additional worlds. They're teaching tactics and sharing technology. Vexter slammed his fist on the console. We should have destroyed Earth when we had the chance. We still can, his weapons officer suggested. One planetary bombardment and the human homeworld ceases to exist. No, Sikthar said firmly. And the room fell silent at his presumption to contradict senior officers. If we destroy Earth now, we prove to every conquered species that the Empire's only response to resistance is genocide. The rebellions would explode across every world we control. The Supreme Commander turned his yellow eyes on the young analyst. Then what do you suggest? Before Sikthar could answer, alarms blared across the bridge, and the main view screen activated, showing an incoming transmission. The caller ID made everyone stiffen. It was from Captain James Harrigan. The old human appeared on screen looking healthier than when they had captured him 6 months ago. He sat in what appeared to be a command center surrounded by human military personnel and representatives from a dozen different alien species. Lord Vexter, Harrigan greeted calmly. I thought it was time we talked. You have nothing I want to hear. The Supreme Commander snarled. Actually, I have exactly what you want, the human replied. I'm offering you a way out of this war with your empire intact and your honor satisfied, laughed bitterly. You think you've won? I think you're losing, Harrigan corrected. Production down across 40% of your manufacturing base. Garrison forces stretched thin and demoralized. Subject species openly rebelling. Your military budget spiraling into unsustainable territory. Should I continue? The bridge crew shifted uncomfortably because everything the human said was accurate. We can still crush you, Dexter insisted. One word from me and Earth burns you can, Harrigan agreed. And then what? Every species in the galaxy watches you commit genocide against a planet that was only defending itself. Every subject race sees that defying the Empire means complete annihilation. Do you really think that makes them more obedient, or less? The Supreme Commander said nothing, or, the old man continued, you can accept that humanity isn't worth the cost of conquering. We're offering terms that let you withdraw with dignity. The Empire does not negotiate with primitives, Vexter stated. But his voice lacked conviction. You negotiated with the Krell after their resistance, Harrigan countered. You reached accommodation with the Hrask when their war proved too expensive. You've made deals before, when the alternative was worse. He leaned forward. Here are our terms. Complete withdrawal of Zetharian forces from Earth and our solar system. Formal recognition of humanity's sovereignty and right to self-defense. Reparations paid in technology and resources to offset the cost of this war. And most importantly, a non-aggression pact enforced by neutral third parties unacceptable. The Supreme Commander replied immediately. You demand too much. We're demanding survival, Harrigan said quietly. Everything else is negotiable. But those are our core requirements. Vexter turned to his staff. Opinion. His economic advisor spoke first. The war is bankrupting us. The human terms are actually quite modest compared to the cost of continued occupation militarily. His fleet commander added reluctantly, we cannot win this type of conflict. We're designed for conventional warfare, not guerrilla insurgency. The intelligence chief nodded agreement. If we destroy Earth, the political fallout could collapse the entire imperial system. Half our subject species are watching to see if resistance works. Sikthar stepped forward, Supreme Commander. I fought against accepting this from the beginning, but the humans have proven their point. They can't defeat us in open battle, but they can make ruling them impossible, Vexter. Stood silent for a long moment before turning back to Harrigan. If we accept these terms, what guarantee do we have that humanity won't continue supporting rebellions across our empire? None, the old man replied honestly. If you continue oppressing conquered species, we'll probably keep helping them. But if you start treating subject races with dignity and allowing them autonomy, we have no reason to interfere. You presume to lecture us on governance? The Supreme Commander growled. I presume to explain reality. Harrigan said, your empire was built on conquest and maintained by fear. But fear only works until someone shows it can be overcome. We showed your subjects that resistance works. You can either learn from that or watch your empire fragment. The transmission ended, leaving the Zetherian command staff in heavy silence 3 days later. Lord Vexther sat across a negotiating table from Captain Harrigan and representatives from Earth's Defense Council. The location was a neutral station operated by the Galactic Commerce Guilda. Negotiations took 14 hours but resulted in the Treaty of Neutral Space, which granted all of humanity's core demands. Zetherian forces would withdraw from Earth's solar system. Humanity would receive technology transfers worth billions in galactic credits, and a non-aggression pact would be monitored by independent observers. The treaty was being finalized. Vexter finally asked the question that had haunted him for months. Would you really have fought too? The last human Harrigan met his eyes without hesitation. We've nearly done it to ourselves a dozen times over resources, ideology, religion, and pride. For our freedom and right to exist, yes. Without question or doubt, the Supreme Commander absorbed this. Your species is insane. Our species is stubborn, the old man corrected. We don't surrender. We don't submit. We adapt and overcome, or we die trying. You could have destroyed Earth, but you couldn't have made us kneel Sicther, who had been present as part of the Zetherian delegation, spoke quietly. Why did you volunteer for the initial mission? You knew it would likely end in capture or death, Harrigan smiled. Because I'm 73 years old. I've lived a full life, and I've seen what humans can accomplish when we work together. If my capture helped convince your empire that we were weak and primitive, then I served my purpose. You knew we would underestimate you, Vexter said. With sudden understanding, we counted on it, the human confirmed. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception. Appearing weak when you were strong, disorganized when you were prepared. We sent an old man in a slow ship because it reinforced every assumption you wanted to make about humanity. The Supreme Commander's scales rippled with grudging respect. You outmaneuvered us before the war even started. We learned from every empire that ever underestimated resistance movements. Harrigan replied, the British in America? The Soviets in Afghanistan? The Americans in Vietnam? History is full of examples where technological superiority lost to determination and unconventional tactics.